let's delve into a groundbreaking development in human rights. This week, the United Nations adopted its first ever resolution specifically addressing discrimination, violence, and harmful practices against people with innate variations in sex characteristics. The term often used is intersex people. This historic move brought by South Africa and Finland, Chile, and Australia marks a significant step forward in the global effort to protect the rights of intersex individuals. Kimberly Zieselman, Outright International Senior Global Advisor on Intersex Rights, joins us from Vermont in the United States. Kimberly was among representatives from the organizations at the forefront of this advocacy. Kimberly, thank you so much for your time. What does the adoption of the United Nations resolution mean for the human rights of intersex individuals, and how does it represent a milestone in international advocacy efforts?
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. And I want to right off the bat acknowledge the long years of work that many of my intersex activist peers across the globe, including on the continent, have put into this milestone victory that occurred yesterday. I think, it's important to understand, first of all, before we get into the topic of the resolution itself, is that intersex is really not that rare. It's just often invisible. And the number of intersex persons like myself are more than double the total population of South Africa, for example. So we are out there. We're just often invisible due to the shame and the stigma that's been put upon us by society. This resolution was a milestone because it is going to really raise the bar, raise the awareness of issues that intersex persons across the globe are facing, such as discrimination and real violence, including things like infanticide, abandonment of children, and medically unnecessary and irreversible surgeries done on children without their consent in order to, quote unquote, fix their bodies to meet typical notions of male or female. Intersex persons like myself often share that experience of discrimination and violence in many different ways, regardless of where we live.
And Kimberly, how have civil society organizations and member states collaborated to advance the cause of intersex rights? And what role has this collaboration played in the adoption of the resolution?
Oh, the intersex movement could not do this without strong allies, including member states at the UN, governments, as well as other NGOs. The collaboration is key and has been key from the very beginning. I mean, I remember going back almost 10 years ago to the UN Office of the High Commissioner convened the first ever expert meeting on intersex rights and brought together many stakeholders. I was privileged enough to be there at the time. And that was sort of the beginning of the acknowledgement of the issues, the human rights issues for intersex persons. At the time, the UN published a fact sheet. They've put out a couple kind of informal reports. And there have been a number of UN bodies who have taken up this issue, looked at it, issued reports and statements in support of intersex. So there has been a lot of work being done by allies as well as intersex-led organizations and activists across the country over the last decade leading up to this. And it's really, quite emotional, actually, for myself and for many of my intersex colleagues to realize that we finally are getting recognition at the level of the United Nations around the physical and emotional harms and discrimination that many of us faced. And our hope is that this resolution is going to raise the bar and bring more attention to this globally and really engage even a bigger number of member states and countries to work with us to eventually stop the harm and provide intersex persons with the human rights that everybody else has.
And on that note, Kimberly, in what ways do you anticipate the resolution will impact national policies and practices related to the treatment of intersex individuals? And what are the next steps in ensuring its effective implementation?
Well, the next steps for this resolution, just to be clear, this resolution calls for the UN Office of the High Commissioner to publish about a year from now, a little more than a year from now, a report. And this will be a formal report with input from many diverse stakeholders. Also, they will be convening an expert panel. So this is just a step again, in raising awareness and really documenting in a very formal way that hasn't been done before the harms that are being suffered by intersex persons across the world. So next steps will include working with many stakeholders coming to the table to participate in this. And I think also just the recognition now that this resolution has been passed and the attention that it's getting is going to get the attention of many, many powerful decision makers across the world who are going to realize, okay, this is the time to step up and take these issues seriously for nearly 1.7% of the population, and no longer will intersex people be invisible.
And looking ahead, you've mentioned what some of the key priorities and ongoing initiatives are in the global efforts to combat discrimination and violence and harmful practices based on sex characteristics. How can various stakeholders contribute to these efforts?
I think at a very basic level, the first step is acknowledging that intersex people exist and not being afraid of intersex persons or fearing intersex persons. You know, a lot of the discrimination and violence that we have experienced has to do with a basic fear of difference, right? In our case, difference over around our bodies. And then kind of myths and misconceptions that come with that. You know, intersex people, I think it's also important to note that it is not a gender identity. Intersex is not a gender identity, nor, of course, is it a sexual orientation. It is a physical way of being. However, intersex persons like myself have suffered a lot of similar discrimination and harm based on similar forms of discrimination and oppression based on fear that the broader LGBT community has faced. So there is some alignment there, but this is also very much an intersectional issue. We need to have children's rights advocates at the table, and I think a resolution like this is going to help bring more powerful allies and experts to the table to understand and then advocate with the intersex community, disability rights advocates, reproductive justice, women's rights, the anti-FGM and female genital mutilation and cutting activists. There's a lot of overlap around medical procedures done on children with all of these intersectional kind of human rights issues, and we need to be working together more collaboratively. So my hope is that this resolution will help speed that along.
Thank you so much for your time. That was Kimberly Zieselman, Outright International's Senior Global Advisor on intersex rights.